You have to respect your actors. When I directed Star Trek IV, I got a magnificent performance out of Bill because I respected him so much.
And when I directed Star Trek V, I got a magnificent performance out of me because I respected me so much.
Where am I? There I am. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream. Let me bring that up. Comments here. Okay. Hello at Rogues1138. Warp speed. Yes, warp speed indeed. And Mr. Scott. Yeah, we're going to see a bit of Scotty in this one. His part's not real big. All right. So we're going to be taking a look at another episode of the original Star Trek series. This is going to be episode 51 in production order. This is Return to Tomorrow. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages, for information about the episode and the making of the episode. All right. So this episode was written by Gene Roddenberry, uncredited, with the story credited to John Dugan, although he did this under a pseudonym of John Kingsbridge, and I'll get into that in the behind-the-scenes stuff because there was quite a bit of a argument over who gets the credit for this story and for the episode. And it is directed by Ralph Senesky. This is from an NBC press release on January 10th, 1968. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, and Lieutenant Commander Ann Mulhall risk death when they lend their bodies to 2 billion-year-old brains in Return to Tomorrow. On NBC television network Star Trek Colorcast, Friday, February 9th, when the Enterprise answers a distress call from a remote planet and beams down to investigate, the crew confronts the preserved brains. Dr. McCoy plans to study the phenomenon, and the other three consent to having the brains inhabit their bodies while the brains devise robot-type housings for themselves so they can become mobile. The plan progresses as proposed until the brain inhabiting Spock's body decides it wants to keep its human form. The aliens, Sargon, Thalasia, and Hinnock, are the sole survivors of their race. They believe that Earthlings and Vulcans alike may be among their descendants. The people who once populated their world evolved to the point where they dared to consider themselves gods, resulting in war which brought an end to their civilization. Sargon and his wife Thalasia are from one side of the dispute. Hinnock, the alien who is using Spock's body, is from the other. In a recurring Star Trek theme, Return to Tomorrow explores the plight of highly advanced aliens who, despite their accomplishments and their wisdom, are still tempted by the pleasures of the flesh. Further explored the pitfalls of a superiority complex as well. And Rogues1138 says, classic. Yes, this is a classic episode. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll jump into this one. So the Enterprise picks up a signal coming from an unknown star system. Now, they find a planet that appears to be dead, but then a bodiless voice tells them that their questions will all be answered. And hey, at FKHC, Return to Tomorrow, not that, we'll have to wait. Okay. Now, the voice calls itself Sargon, and it tells them to enter a standard orbit over the planet. Kirk says that this planet is dead, and it can't have any life, at least not as they understand it. Sargon tells them that he is as dead as his planet, and that if Kirk doesn't heed him, it will lead to the death of mankind as well. And again, written by John Kingsbridge, which was a pseudonym for John Dugan. Directed by Ralph Senesky. Now, Spock says that he is detecting energy readings from deep within the planet, as well as a chamber with an oxygen atmosphere that is over 100 miles below the surface. Sargon tells them to beam down. Kirk questions this as the chamber is deep within the planet and their transporters can't reach that deep. But Sargon assures them that he will make the transporter function safely and they don't need to be concerned. So Kirk and Spock go to the transporter where they're joined by McCoy, who is not thrilled to be beaming down into solid rock. And Scotty questions this as well, thinking it might be some kind of trick, but Kirk says that it's clear that this intelligence has great power and will probably kill them anyway if it wants to, or anytime it wants to. Then Kirk meets Dr. Ann Mulhall, a biologist, who says that she was ordered to report to the transporter room. Now, of course, Kirk didn't order her, so he's like, who did? And obviously it must have been Sargon. So they get on the transporter pad and then they beam out, but they're beaming with a couple of red shirts, including Eddie Paskey as Lieutenant Kelly here, but only Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Dr. Mulhall beam out. The two red shirts are left behind. Now they materialize inside a room, and then they go into an adjoining stone chamber where they find a glowing sphere. And this sphere speaks to them and tells them that it is Sargon's, or Sargon, I mean. Now Spock scans the sphere and finds that it contains pure energy with no physical form. McCoy asks if they once had a body, and Sargon tells them that he once had a body much like theirs. And I kept waiting for him to say, we have evolved beyond the need for bodies, but he never does. Now, he refers to them as his children, and Kirk asks why he keeps doing that, and Sargon tells them that they may be descended from Sargon's people. They once traveled the galaxy much like humans do, and they may have visited Earth in the past, but he is uncertain since records from that time are now lost. So the implication is that basically is that the race that was on this planet is where humans came from on Earth. And I'll get into that a little bit more into the behind the scenes stuff. Now, Sargon reveals that his people destroyed their civilization in a conflict long ago. Kirk asks what Sargon wants from them, and then Kirk convulses. And when he speaks, he now speaks with Sargon's voice. Sargon revels in being flesh and blood again. But Spock asks what what has become of Captain Kirk and what plans Sargon has for his body. Sargon tells them that Kirk is now inside the sphere. But because his mind isn't as powerful as Sargon's, Kirk cannot speak to them. McCoy's tricorder shows that Kirk's vital signs are now all elevated. His blood pressure, heartbeat are through the roof. His metabolic rate is really increased. And Dr. Mulhall says that Kirk's body is burning out and he'll die if Sargon doesn't allow Kirk to return. Then Sargon reveals that there are two other spheres, the only other survivors of his people. Sargon tells them that he and the other two plan to inhabit the bodies of Kirk, Spock, and Dr. Mulhall so that they can live again. He shows them another chamber with more spheres. Sargon names them as Hinnock and Falacia, who he says is his wife. Sargon reveals that he lured the Enterprise to them so that he and the other two can inhabit the bodies for a time in order to construct android bodies for themselves and then transfer their minds into the androids, returning the bodies of Kirk and the others to their proper owners. McCoy warns that Kirk's heart rate and BP are through the roof, and we see Kirk sweating profusely. Now, Dr. McCoy and Dr. Mulhall question this whole plan, so Sargon tells them to return to the Enterprise to or I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. So he grows faint and weak, and so he has to return to his sphere, and Kirk returns to his body. So then Kirk says that his mind and Sargon's were joined briefly, and so he now, I guess you would say melded, like a mind meld. So he knows Sargon's thoughts, and he knows that Sargon can be trusted, and they don't need to fear him. Now, McCoy and Dr. Mulhall question this, so Sargon tells them to return to the Enterprise to discuss the matter and make a decision. Sargon assures them that if they refuse, they will be free to go. And this is one of the my favorite moments in the episode. So Sargon speaks, then they do this jump cut to Scotty, and he's like, "You're gonna do what?" So Scotty thinks this whole thing is madness, of course. Spock says that if they create new bodies and return with them to the Federation, these advanced aliens have guidance and knowledge that could allow humanity to leap ahead technologically by thousands of years. Dr. Mulhall is intrigued by the idea from a scientific standpoint and is willing to agree to the transfer. McCoy is suspicious, though, and cautions against it, noting that these beings are almost like gods and could kill them all with a thought without even meaning to. Now, he demands to know why they should take this risk. And this is when Kirk gives his "risk is our business" speech, arguing that man wasn't meant to just stop at this point, to come this far and then not learn more, to stop learning or growing, and that despite all the risks, they can't let the potential for advancement that this situation offers just slip away. Yeah, FKHC 2005 says, Dr. Mulhall, you mean Dr. Pulaski? Yeah. Okay, so after his rousing speech, everyone agrees, or at least McCoy shuts up about it. I don't know if he really ever agrees. So the spheres are brought up to the ship, and they go to the sick bay to make the transfer. And so Sargon, Thalasia, and Hinnock transfer their minds into the respective bodies of Kirk, Dr. Mulhall, and Spock. After they awaken in their new bodies, Sargon and Thalasia are both very pleased to see each other flesh and blood again, and they both express pleasure at the bodies that they occupy. Hinnock is also pleased with his body, noting that his body has superior strength and endurance. But Sargon and Thalasia both quickly grow faint and have to return to their beds. McCoy says that this just isn't going to work, but Sargon and Hinnock tell them that they can help him formulate a metabolic reduction serum that will reduce the strain on their bodies. Due to Spock's Vulcan physiology, Hinnock can remain in Spock's body for some time without a problem, because Vulcans have a higher metabolism than humans anyway. McCoy warns Kirk that another transfer may be lethal. So Hinnock takes Nurse Chapel to the medical lab, where Hinnock creates a metabolic stabilizer. So he gives Chapel one hypo for himself, and then offers her another for Thalasia. Then he gives her a third hypo for Sargon. Chapel notes that this formula is different from the others. And then Hinnock pretty much just outright tells her, yeah, I'm gonna kill Sargon and then keep Thalasia for myself, and I'm gonna keep this body too. And of course Chapel's like, wait, what? But then he uses his mental powers to basically brainwash her and make her forget what he told her, so that she does not remember what Hinnock is plotting. And FKHC says Sargon now sounds like Scotty's. Yeah, so I guess the Sargon was voiced by James Doohan, actually. Okay. Now later, Sargon and Falacia. Here, let me bring the other up here. So later, Sargon and Falacia are working on the androids as they reminisce about their past together. Then Hinnock shows up and reminds them that they'll soon have bodies of their own, but of course, they'll be machine bodies that can't feel. Sargon says that their minds will survive, and that's what's important, and that they can then teach others, like humanity, to avoid the mistakes that they made. Then he grows weak and says that the time for the next injections is getting close. Now, in sickbay, Chapel seems distracted, and McCoy asks her if she's all right. And she says that she keeps thinking there's something important that she had to tell him, but she can't remember what it is. Now, Scotty comes to the lab to provide some equipment to Falacia. And then Scotty insists that these bodies they're building just aren't going to work, but Hinnock and Falacia assure him that they will. Now, after Scotty leaves, Hinnock suggests to Falacia that they should just keep the bodies they're in instead of putting themselves into androids. Falacia is resistant to this, but when he asks her if this is really what she wants, she admits that no, it isn't. So she goes to Sargon, who is continuing to grow weaker. And he says he reviewed the formula that Hinnock used, and it's clearly the correct one. So he calls McCoy and asks him to bring another injection. Now, she suggests that the host bodies will adjust in time, and then the injections won't be needed. But Sargon says that will take too long, and they don't have the right to keep the bodies they're in. But she appeals to him, saying that they don't have to do this. Then Sargon collapses, and McCoy arrives right on cue with the serum. But he scans Sargon and says, "You're dead, Jim," or "He's dead, Jim." So they take Kirk's body to sickbay and they put him on life support to keep his body alive. And then Falacia enters. Or I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Now, Hinnock has completed one of the android bodies, which is ready. And although it's a male body, he says it's for Falacia and tells her to enter it, telling her that he will adjust the body to make it look female later. But she refuses. Now, of course, he chides her about that, saying, this is what Sargon wanted, but she just won't do it. So she goes to sickbay and confronts McCoy and admits to McCoy that she intends to keep Mulhall's body for herself. McCoy isn't surprised by this at all. It's clear, his reaction, it's clear he saw this coming. He knew where this was going to go, and which is why he was warning against it from the beginning. And he says, I suppose Hinnock's going to be keeping Spock's body too. And she says, look, what Hinnock does is his own business. Of course, that's exactly what Hinnock intends to do. So she offers him a bargain because although Sargon is dead and Kirk's mind is basically empty right now, Kirk is still stuck in that sphere and he doesn't have the power, to return to his own body. So Falacia makes him a bargain and says, look, if you'll keep my secret, and not tell anyone what I'm doing, I'll put Kirk back in his body for you. And McCoy, of course, rejects this, saying, I don't have the right to bargain with her body. And anyway, I don't see how that would work because in the episode, the Sargon and Falacia and Hinnock, they speak with these kind of weird echoes, to their voices. They don't sound normal. So anyone who hears her talk's going to know, like, that's not your normal voice. They're going to know something's up. But anyway, yeah, Kirk refuses. And then Falacia becomes angry, saying that she and the others are like gods and they can do what they want. And then she punishes McCoy with flames or something. I'm not sure what they're supposed to be, but basically causes him intense pain. But then she calms down and regrets what she's doing and asks McCoy to forgive her, saying that Sargon was right. The temptations of a human body are too great. Then they hear Sargon speak, saying that he is pleased with Philesa's realization. And then Philesa realizes that when he died, Sargon transferred his consciousness into the Enterprise itself. So he is not gone. He is still around. Then they kind of like commune for a moment, and then Philesa reveals that they have a plan to deal with Hinnock. So they ask McCoy to, or actually first Chapel enters. Then Philesa asks McCoy to leave the room for a minute. So he leaves, but then after he leaves, the door shuts for a moment. And he can't get in. Then the door opens and Chapel leaves, seeming to be almost like in a trance or something. McCoy returns to the room to find Kirk up on his feet again with his mind back where it belongs. But then McCoy looks around and realizes that the 3 receptacles have all been destroyed. Now, of course, this is a problem because and Dr. Mulhall is also back in her body. I forgot to mention that. So Kirk and Mulhall are normal again. And presumably Philesa has transferred herself into the Enterprise too. They don't really say specifically. I guess you just left to assume that. But Spock's mind was in the 3rd receptacle, and now it's destroyed. And so McCoy realizes that Spock must have been killed. And of course, he's dismayed that Kirk would let that happen, but McCoy says that it was necessary. And then he says that now they need to kill Spock's body along with the thing that is inhabiting it. Now on the bridge, Hinnock is terrorizing the crew. Kirk and he also seizes command of the ship. Now Kirk and the others arrive, but Hinnock immobilizes Kirk and Mulhall with intense pain. McCoy had formulated a poison that is effective against Vulcans in order to kill Hinnock. Now he attempts to inject Spock, or Hinnock rather, with the poison, but Hinnock just immobilizes him, telling McCoy that he can sense all the thoughts around him. Now he tells Chapel, who is clearly under his control, to inject McCoy with the poison instead. She takes the hypo from McCoy, but then she injects Hinnock with the poison. And at first Hinnock is, shocked by this, but then he just laughs it off and says, I'll just transfer into another body. But then he realizes that Sargon is still alive and is preventing him from transferring into another person. Or into the ship too, I guess. So he pleads with Sargon to allow him to live and take another body, but then he dies. Now, Kirk laments that Spock had to die, but then Spock revives. Now, McCoy says that's impossible, that there was enough poison in that hypo to kill 10 Vulcans. But then Sargon tells them that he let McCoy believe that so that Hinnock would read his mind and believe it too. And it was actually just a mild sedative. They had just tricked McCoy into believing, it was a poison. But he had to believe it, otherwise Hinnock would know. And if he had known, then he would have just he would have tried to flee the body too soon. Now they ask where Spock's mind is since the sphere was destroyed, and Spock reveals that he had been placed into Chapel's mind before the sphere was destroyed. And then Chapel says, and seems quite pleased that she and Spock joined minds for a while. Spock doesn't seem as excited about that. But Chapel seems very pleased. Now, Sargon tells them that he and Philesa will leave them, but then asks Kirk, because Kirk says, is there anything we can do for you? And he asks if they can re-enter Kirk and Mulhall's bodies briefly to say goodbye, and they do, and it ends there. So a pretty, it's a solid episode. I wouldn't call it a great one. Diana Muldaur as Anne Mulhall, of course. I kind of like the previous episode. I went back and forth on a B minus or a C plus. I'll go with a C plus, I think. Okay. Let's get back. All right. So Return to Tomorrow has a powerful opening. We are led to believe the booming masculine voice which penetrates the bridge and refers to Earth people as his children could be God. Despite its similarities to Who Mourns for Adonias, this plot device works well to catch our attention. Hold on just a moment. Let me take a drink of water right quick. There I am. Okay, hold on. Things so difficult. There we go. That's what I want. If the pompous and humorless tone of Sargon, with his constant referral to the Enterprise crew as my children and to Kirk as my son, and to Thalassa in the body of Dr. Mulhall as my beloved, is heavy-handed, blame Roddenberry, who wrote the script, uncredited. Shatner's acting borders on hammy. In particular, the briefing room speech about risk is over the top. It is preachy and taken to the limit as the camera pushes in on Kirk with too much music building to too much of a crescendo. It's interesting that the author is so critical of that, because most people, I think, love that speech and think it's one of Kirk's better moments. The entire feel for Return to Tomorrow is out of sync with Star Trek's second season. The writing coming from Roddenberry, not Gene Coon, is one reason. The characters are overly formal, lacking in humor, and making speeches in place of honest communication. Also, the music provided by George Dunning serves as a blueprint for most of the scores to come in the third season. Return to Tomorrow is, in fact, a glimpse of Star Trek's tomorrow. If you like this, then you may also enjoy Turnabout Intruder or Spock's Brain. I guess I liked it more than he did. Regardless, the concept behind the episode is original, intriguing, and best of all, Nimoy is allowed an opportunity to grin from ear to ear and play a dastardly rascal. Yeah, Nimoy is clearly having a lot of fun in this episode. He's clearly enjoying playing evil. Nimoy as Hinnock is an absolute delight, and his performance brings an element of humor to a script which otherwise is so lacking in that area. These things alone make this inconsistent Trek worth taking. Okay, now, contrary to information given in many past books about Star Trek, John Kingsbridge is not a pseudonym for Gene Roddenberry, but rather for writer John Dugan. The confusion came from the writing credits on the final shooting script. which read teleplay by Gene Roddenberry, story by John Dugan, compared to the screen credit telling us Return to Tomorrow was written by John Kingsbridge. Many believed Roddenberry opted for a pseudonym after watching the rough edit because he wasn't happy with the results. This is not so. Roddenberry was proud of his script and very pleased with the end product. John Dugan was the one who wasn't happy and remained so for decades after. Much of the bad blood had to do with religious beliefs. Dugan was a graduate of Fordham University in New York, where his first play, Martyr Without Tears, was presented on stage in 1942 while he was serving overseas as a lieutenant in the Army. After the end of World War II, Dugan resumed his academic pursuit, earning his Master of Fine Arts degree from the Catholic University of America, then a doctorate in theater from the University of Minnesota. He returned to the Catholic University to begin his first career as a teacher, which took him to the University of California at Berkeley and in Los Angeles at UCLA. Dugan retired from teaching in 1960 when he began selling scripts to television. His first job seemed an obvious step, writing for the Catholic series Insight, which was a half-hour anthology series. Dugan soon shifted to westerns, medical dramas, and war stories, with writing assignments on shows such as Bonanza, Ben Casey, and 12 O'Clock High, among others. Dugan had met Gene Roddenberry and Gene Coon at various Writer Guild functions, and casual friendliness led to an invitation to seek out writing assignments, both at the Lieutenant in 1963 and then at Star Trek. The lieutenant job for Roddenberry didn't pan out, with Dugan's assignment being cut off at the story stage. Now, Dugan had a shot with Gene Coon, who took his pitch on April 5th of 1967, and then, impressed by the unique concept as well as the central theme, ordered a treatment to be delivered in the first few days of May. The title of the episode, Return to Tomorrow, was explained in a line of dialogue that was later cut from the episode, where Hinnock, while basically assaulting Anne Mulhall, says, "A return to tomorrow that might have been." Then, as he forcefully kisses her, he adds, "and will be again." Now, as usual, there's a lot of back and forth and memos and stuff about the development of the script. I'm gonna just kind of touch on some highlights and not go through everything. In Dugan's outline, Hinnock is not just a hedonist, but a tactless cad. He leers after women, uses crude language to get attention, and grossly overeats. He delights in all pleasures of the flesh, so Kirk uses a non-pleasure to get him to abandon Spock's body, inflicting pain. Of this, Roddenberry said, quote, "I cannot quite believe that the physical pain or abuse would send a brilliantly advanced intellectual like Hinnock running frightened back to into his own brain. It will have to be explained a little better for me." With this memo, it was Roddenberry's idea not to use another actor's voice when the aliens inhabit the bodies of Kirk, Spock, and Yeoman Anne Mulhall. She was a yeoman in early versions of the script. She would be made a lieutenant commander later. He felt it would be easier and more effective to put reverb on the voices of Shatner, Nimoy, and whatever actress wound up playing Falesa. Stan Robertson at NBC wasn't as impressed with Roddenberry over the concept. He dropped by the offices to discuss the matter with Gene Coon, who, in order to keep the story from being cut off, used Roddenberry's memo to demonstrate further changes that could be made. On May 15th, Robertson sent Coon a letter insisting that, quote, "the highly cerebral portions of the story be eliminated and the complex nature of the plot be simplified." Dugan was asked to straight line his story, and it took a month for the first draft script to arrive. In this script, unlike the finalized episode, the receptacles which contain the intellects of Sargon, Falesa, and Hinnock are not glowing spheres. Sargon's receptacle, the first to be encountered, is described as about 20 inches square, a speaker grid set in its facade. Its cover off and set to one side, under a clear plastic covering lies a large glowing brain floating in a clear fluid. And this was also pretty much the same description given of the providers in the early versions of the script for Gamesters of Triskelion. They're in this receptacle floating in a fluid in their glowing brains, of course. After various rewrites, an effort was made to make changes. In time, Kirk was given better motivation for going along with Sargon's wishes. He tells us after being touched by Sargon's mind that he is convinced the alien is sincere. It is insinuated that Spock gains trust for Sargon through use of a mind meld. These explanations help slightly, and then later still in the writing process, Roddenberry wrote Kirk's impassioned and somewhat preachy speech about the Enterprise's mission and the greatness of men who, for the sake of scientific and spiritual enlightenment, were not afraid to face the unknown. Let's see. Okay, so again, I think NBC had issues with the script. Now, one of them was some of the sexual content in the episode. As mentioned in early versions of the script, Hinnock is just right from the get-go, he's just an obvious villain. He's an obvious creep who's up to no good. And in the episode, he is repeatedly, basically kind of assaulting women, sexually assaulting them and leering at them and making a lot of sexual, suggestive comments. And NBC wanted this stuff taken out. So Kuhn sent a memo to Dugan addressing these concerns, and Dugan basically wrote back, basically kind of refusing to do it, basically saying, what's the problem? What is wrong with this? It's fine. And of course, it was a problem because NBC, which is the network, didn't want this stuff, and of course, they're the ones who ultimately decided if it got made or not. Kuhn waited a few weeks before calling Dugan. Between mounting creative differences with Roddenberry, particularly concerning comedy in the series, and dealing with argumentative writers like John Dugan, Kuhn wanted out. Shortly after speaking to Dugan on the phone, Kuhn tendered his resignation. So it seems like this butting heads with Dugan was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back for Kuhn. And he decided, you know what, I've just had enough of this. It took 3 months to get a second draft from Dugan, received on October 13th. By then, John Meredith Lucas was sitting in the producer's chair. Fontana still liked the story and felt a good show could come from it, provided they got busy with some rewriting. She told Lucas, quote, instead of a yeoman, which is a rather nondescript occupation, I would prefer to see Anne as a lieutenant and a scientist, maybe even lieutenant commander. I would prefer to see the actress who plays the role as a mature woman and not some cutesy pie little chick. As she read about the three brains and a proposed fight between Sargon and Hinnock, while in the bodies of Kirk and Spock, Fontana was struck by a sense of deja vu. She told Lucas, quote, we're not doing Gamesters of Triskelion again, in which we have exposed brains, 3 of them, in fact, doing a lot of mental tricks. And we have done the Kirk beats up Spock or Spock beats up Kirk thing before several times in Bread and Circuses and Amok Time. I think we must apply ourselves to getting around the Kirk Spock fighting at the end of the episode, if humanly possible. Now, in Dugan's script, Sargon tells the Enterprise landing party how, after his world became uninhabitable, 2 of its people, a man and a woman, left their dead world in the last spaceship and went to an uninhabited planet very much like their own, which was the planet Earth. Yes, Captain, Sargon says, the man and woman from this planet were your Adam and Eve. So this was another thing that the network didn't like, and I don't think Dugan liked it. That the network didn't like this implication that life was originated on another world. Now I know that today, this is kind of a thing we often talk about, whether life originated off of the Earth, panspermia, maybe microbes came on a meteor, or maybe, of course, there's the whole ancient alien thing. But back in the 60s, that stuff really wasn't being suggested yet. At that point, it was still very much the idea that we originated here. And of course, religious views were much stronger back then, too. The whole, that sort of ancient aliens thing really didn't get introduced until Chariots of the Gods, which was in the early 70s, when still a few years off. Now, I believe Stan Robertson, or actually maybe it was Bob Justman, one of the executives at Desilu, suggested just shelving this episode because it had so many problems. But Star Trek, due to the network picking up 8 more episodes to round out the season, they needed 8 episodes to shoot on a very short notice. And they had this one here that was almost done. And so it was decided we can't just abandon the script. We got to make it work. So Gene Roddenberry stepped in and took over. He had always liked Dugan's story and felt confident that he could salvage it. To counter Robertson's concerns, Roddenberry made it clear very early on in the script that Sargon only speculates that Adam and Eve were descendants of what the script refers to as the Aretans from the planet Aret, or Aret, which is Terra spelled backwards, by the way. Even with this point softened, Roddenberry had Dr. Ann Mulhall quickly counter, "It is our belief that we evolved independently." And then Roddenberry had Sargon backpedal by saying perhaps his seeds were planted on Vulcan and not Earth. It seemed to do the trick even with the "my children and my son and my beloved" lines that found their way into Roddenberry's rewrites. His final draft was delivered in early November, with revisions arriving later that month. Now, following okay, so I'll just skip this part. I don't think we need to get into that. While undertaking the rewriting, Roddenberry added his name to the title page, basically giving him the teleplay by credits. So now it read teleplay by Gene Roddenberry. And Dugan was downgraded to story by John Dugan. Roddenberry was justified in doing this. The premise, the characters' names, and approximately 50% of the plotting were all retained from Dugan's script, but all the dialogue had been changed. Therefore, while it was still mostly Dugan's story, it was now Roddenberry's writing. Comparing the two scripts, Roddenberry's is certainly better. Dugan, while doing an exceptionally good job of capturing the voices and attitudes of the series' regular characters, delivered a script that is redundant in its plotting and, insofar as the characterization elements are concerned, not believable. For instance, it is made obvious almost from the moment we meet him that Hinnock is up to no good. There's no subtlety. He has no sympathy for others. He is impatient, often angry and bullying, with obvious intentions of rebelling against Sargon and Thalassa and keeping Spock's body for himself. He is also blatantly flirtatious with Thalassa and arrogantly suggesting she would have a better time with him than Sargon. He is also cartoonishly hedonistic, shoveling plateful after plateful of food into his mouth, while Spock's consciousness begs him to stop all the gluttony. Hinnock just tells Spock to shut up and gobbles down more food anyway. Roddenberry wisely eliminated all of this. One of the most successful elements of Roddenberry's script, barely present in Dugan's, is the amusement that Hinnock conveys while in Spock's body, allowing the normally non-smiling Spock to grin and even flirt. Also in Roddenberry's version, Sargon and Thalassa, while over serious and somewhat pompous, are at least portrayed as less ignorant when it comes to how dangerous Hinnock is. Quote, "John never thought the script was problematic," said Dorothy Fontana. "He was really kind of bitter about the rewrite. As I recall, the script wasn't bad, but it did need some work, and Gene Roddenberry did it." Roddenberry knew that this would go to the Writers Guild arbitration board. He was confident they would see things his way, especially in light of it being a 100% dialogue rewrite. Dugan, for his part, was equally confident the board would rule in his favor and was convinced Roddenberry was trying to steal his story. He said, quote, "I was staggered at this development, and when the script went into arbitration by a jury of my peers, it came back as written by John Dugan." So Gene had tried to claim a credit that he was not entitled to. So the board ruled in Dugan's favor and gave him credit for the episode. However, despite the WGA decision, Dugan did not want his name associated with the material. In his rewrite, Roddenberry, a man who rebelled against religion, had Sargon tell his wife that they could not allow themselves to exist in a human world and that should therefore allow themselves to fade into oblivion. Dugan says, "That line totally went against my philosophy and my beliefs," Dugan said. "I didn't want to be associated with it. This oblivion idea is Roddenberry's, not mine. My philosophy was that these entities would exist as spirits for eternity, but they wouldn't have their bodies. That might be a small thing, but I have a reputation and a philosophy, and everybody who knows me knows what I stand for. I certainly don't stand for oblivion in the afterlife. So I used my pseudonym, John Kingsbridge, on the script." When you write a script, you don't expect to have your worldview changed by a producer. The rest of Roddenberry's changes were trivial. As I said in my letter to the arbitration board, the big thing was the change in the episode's philosophy. All right, now Ralph Sineski was chosen to direct this episode. Given little notice, Ralph Sineski was hired to direct. This episode was intended for Joseph Pevney, but Pevney had had enough of Star Trek. And I said, what was it? Which episode was? I think it was the Immunity Syndrome. I talked about it in that live stream where he directed that one, and he was really kind of tired of Star Trek after that because he felt that the actors, particularly Nimoy and Shatner, were having a way too much sway in how the characters were portrayed. Okay, so Rogues 113, it says, "Where are you reading this from?" So this is from a book called These Are the Voyages. It's actually a series of books. There's one for each season. It's written by a guy called Mark Cushman. And this was published, where was it? It was like early 2010s. Let me check the exact year. 2014. Yeah, published in 2014. Okay, let me see here. Okay, so Sineski said, quote, "I did that episode after I received a last-minute request for me to do it. I originally said I can't because there was a conflict. There was a Jewish holiday that fell in there during the shooting days. There was only one day that was a conflict, so Herb Solo and John Lucas put their heads together and they worked it out so I could do the show and go home at 4 o'clock on that day. And John Meredith Lucas would come down and finish the day's directing for me." Hail, there's Gwagnar. Hail, Gwagnar. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. And Rogues 1138 says, "Must pick those books up." Yeah, they're very informative. I've learned a lot by watching these, by reading these books. I've learned a lot about the show. And just you learn a lot about what they went through with just getting the show made. You don't realize how many obstacles there are and how many headaches there are in just getting a show made. Especially back then on network TV. You had to basically grind out an episode every week, and that was not easy. And you also learn how a lot of the choices made in the episodes that you're like, why would they do that? Or this makes no sense or whatever. And a lot of the time it's just because they didn't have the money to do it properly, or they didn't have the time. They just didn't have the time to fix it. It often comes down to that. And Gwagnar says, "I hope everyone has a happy holiday and a Merry Christmas." Yes, Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy New Year to everyone as well. And Rogue says, Merry Christmas as well. Okay, this was Sineski's 5th Star Trek episode to direct. Due to the last-minute change of directors, the normal 6 days for preparation had to be squeezed down to 5. This meant that the casting process had to go very quickly. Fortunately, only one guest performer was needed, although the demands on this actress would be immense. Dorothy Fontana said, quote, the biggest problem on that episode came down to the acting and partly some of the writing, and that we had to have these people in our characters' bodies. Now, how do they talk? How do they express themselves? What are the feelings? And how do you make that work and sell it? The burden then, with mixed results, fell on Sineski, Shatner Nimoy, and guest player Diana Muldaur, who is cast as Dr. Ann Mulhall. There she is. So Muldaur was 29. And I would have guessed she was a little older. You know, I would have guessed like maybe 33, 35, somewhere in that range. This was only her 3rd year performing as an actress in front of the camera. But she had quickly become an in-demand actress on network TV and had been featured prominently in episodes of Dr. Kildare, I Spy, Run for Your Life, and Gunsmoke. Quote, I had done about 5 or 6 shows with Diana and suggested her for Return to Tomorrow, said Sineski. And of course, they loved her. She's a beautiful lady and such a good and solid actress. And of course, everybody, as mentioned earlier, Star Trek fans pretty much all know Diana Muldaur. She'll return in the 3rd season. Is there in the Truth No Beauty? I think that's the episode she's in, where she plays a different character. And of course, probably best known for playing the character of Dr. Pulaski on the 2nd season of Next Generation. And you know, and this is kind of off subject, so I don't know how much time do I have? We're almost at an hour, so I'll make it quick. So, you know, Muldaur was brought onto the show partly because they wanted to create more conflict in the cast, right? And I think that bringing her in, you know, because her character is kind of grumpy and irascible, and I think it was clearly an attempt to try and duplicate particularly with her and Data, it was an attempt to try and duplicate the sort of dynamic between McCoy and Spock, right? But it didn't quite work. For one thing, because, you know, Spock kind of returns the jibes. You know, he kind of is, it's subtle, but you can tell that Spock, you know, he's kind of enjoying it too on a certain level. You know, Spock does have a sense of humor and he loves kind of giving sort of rejoinders and little digs back at McCoy. But it doesn't work with Data partly because Data, again, just has no sense of humor, so he can't really do it, but also because the character of Data is so kind of an innocent, you know, he's sort of an innocent character. And so Pulaski's sort of taunting him or sort of jibing at him and all, it comes across kind of as mean and kind of as bullying. And I think that's part of why, you know, the viewers didn't like her and didn't like that character. It just didn't work. And from what I've heard, apparently, like, a lot of the dislike that, you know, it wasn't just her character that rubbed the other actors the wrong way. The kind of Muldaur apparently wasn't really thrilled with all the way technology had become so integrated into the show and stuff. She felt it was becoming too technologically focused. And she kind of made that known. And so that's, I think, in part why after that one season, she was sent away. It was kind of ironic, though, because, you know, she was more or less retired when they asked her to come back and do this. And she was asked to come on and play this sort of disruptive character who would sort of create conflict. Well, after she left Star Trek, there was another show you probably remember called L.A. Law, which was on around the same time that Star Trek was, Next Generation was. And pretty quickly after leaving Next Generation, she got hired on that show, playing a similar character, playing this character who's sort of disruptive and causes problems. And that was a great success for her. She actually wound up winning a daytime, or not a daytime, but an Emmy for Best Supporting Actress in a Dramatic Series for that. And it's kind of funny because she was retired and then it winds up leading to her winning an Emmy, which I believe was her only one. And Rogue says he is retired now. Well, I hope you're enjoying your retirement. Okay, where was I? Okay. Now, okay. Now, so as for the regular actors, it's interesting. I wish I forgot to include. Did I include a? Okay, well, I don't think I include a good look at him. That's a mistake on my part. But if you look at this image here, you can see that is George Takei, who is back as Sulu. And he returned to the show for this episode after an extended absence doing the Green Berets. He had not intended to be gone this long, but there apparently had been some storms that had like wrecked the sets and they had to be rebuilt. So he was gone for longer than had been intended. And he missed out on some good parts. You know, a lot of the stuff that he was going to do got reassigned to Chekhov. Oh, and Rogues 1138 says, yes, thank you. 20 years in law enforcement ended November 2nd. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for your service. It's funny, though, that you call yourself, you were in law enforcement and yet your handle is Rogues. Interesting. Okay, so Takei later recalled, I returned to Los Angeles heartsick and resentful. The scripts I had taken with me to Georgia had all been filmed. The lines I had so anxiously committed to memory and had already been spoken by someone else. The show that I returned to was titled Return to Tomorrow. It was like returning to the dinner table after briefly excusing myself, only to find my meal cold and half-eaten by someone else. Oh, okay. So you were a corrections officer. Oh, okay. Well, I hope you didn't. I hope you didn't have any mishaps, or you got attacked or anything. I'm actually well, I'm not going to get into that. I'm already getting over time here, so let me get back and focus here. Okay, and yes, as mentioned before, George Takei, who again has a pretty small role in this episode, but he actually provided the voice of Sargon. Okay, and then there was, let me bring, okay, let me bring that scene with the android body. Where is that? There it is. Okay, so Rogue says, no way, I'm a martial artist as well. Cool. Yeah, I imagine it would help to do that in that line of work. Okay, so this was the android body that was going to be used by Thalassa. And as you can see, it's got this kind of shiny, kind of sheen to it. And that was to make the body look like it was made of plastic. Now, this guy is Bill Blackburn. He was a stuntman that did several episodes of the show. He was the same guy who wore the White Rabbit costume back in Shore Leave. That was him. And he was also one of the stuntmen who wore the Gorn costume in Arena. And there were, if you'll recall from the episode I did on that one, there were actually 3 different actors who wore that costume. There was the main guy, who I think might have been Bill Blackburn, or was it? I'm not sure. I think actually it was another guy was the main guy. So, and he wore it for most of the episode. Then I think Blackburn wore it for close-ups, for close-up shots. And then after most of the episode was done, there were like some quick pickup shots they had to do. And so they got a third guy to wear it for those. And so what he's got all over his body here is they actually painted him with acetate. And he was covered with it except for his back. They didn't want to cover his back because they wanted his skin to be able to breathe. They were afraid his skin might suffocate. Oh, what's her name? You know, in Goldfinger, the girl that got painted gold. You know, that thing. Blackburn continued, so I'm standing there with this stuff all over me, and all of a sudden they decided that the scene needed to be done later. This was at 9 a.m. and later meant hours later. At the end of the day, I'm finally doing the damn thing. I had this stuff on me all day long. I couldn't even move my face because it would have cracked. So finally they said, lie down now. Spock's going to make this speech. Can you hold your breath? Well, I'm a swimmer and I can hold my breath for 2 minutes, but I didn't realize how long the speech was. And I'm lying there and I'm lying there and I'm holding my breath and Leonard is droning on and on. And finally the scene ended and Sineski said, good job. And I started to pull my face makeup off. And yeah, and actually, if you'll remember, I don't think I got it from this one, but in the last episode, in the end credits, there's a picture of him actually pulling the makeup off in the end credits of the episode. Yeah, and Goldfinger, right? Did I not say Goldfinger? Which one did I say? Did I say another movie? Maybe I just said James Bond. I'm not sure. Okay, now after having a day off for Thanksgiving, cast and crew were back on the job on Friday, November 24th. Shatner's weight gain appeared to have peaked with this episode, and this is another thing talked about in previous streams. So, you know, usually the season would start with Shatner, you know, pretty trim and in pretty good shape, but due to the demands of shooting, you know, because he would have a lot of dialogue and be on set a lot, it would be pretty grueling. And as the season wore on, oh, did I? Okay, all right, good. As the season wore on, Shatner would he would gain weight. You know, he'd put on weight over the season. Note when Sargon and Kirk's body collapses on the briefing room floor, wardrobe again had Shatner wear a black t-shirt under his velour top to prevent his skin from showing. But with him flat on his back, there was no hiding the gut that had been building up. And you can kind of see there he has got a bit of a belly there. Like many Americans, Shatner began dieting after Thanksgiving. A slight weight loss would begin to be detectable in the next episode, and more so in the weeks that would follow. The production itself was rushed. Sineski was normally given 7 days to film a 60-minute episode. The rule at Star Trek had always been 6 days, although this goal was rarely achieved during the first season. Of the 21 episodes shot so far for season 2, 10 had gone over schedule, including 2 of the 3 that Sineski directed. The director fully understood the importance of making the score. I'll skip that. He said Gulf Western, the owner of Paramount right next door, had purchased Desilu. The wall separating the 2 studios had been torn down. It was now just one big unhappy family. When I first came to Star Trek, Gene Kuhn told me that although the shows were supposed to be scheduled for a 6-day shoot, it was actually averaging out to about 6.5. When Paramount bought Desilu Studios, the edict from the new owners was that all shows must be completed in 6 days, period. But there was more. A normal shooting day had a crew call of 7 a.m. for an 8 a.m. shoot, and the day would end at 7 p.m. Then another order came in from the new management that filming must end at 6:12 p.m., period. That was 48 minutes less for filming every day. 48 minutes times 6 days is 288 minutes. 288 minutes divided by 60 is 4.8 hours. So basically, they had nearly 5 hours less every week to film an episode after Paramount took over. Quote, Return to Tomorrow was Sineski's least favorite episode of those he directed for Star Trek. In an interview with his book, he said, Bill Shatner was always competent, except in Return to Tomorrow. I thought it was badly acted. It was just a strange show, and in retrospect, I think one of those shows that you would read as science fiction, but you couldn't really act it. Leonard is okay because he approached the role with a little more depth than Shatner did. And Diana Muldaur, who I had worked with before, is so much better. And in truth, is there in truth no beauty? The material was almost self-defeating. It wasn't Roddenberry's best work, and I'll say this too: if Gene Coon were still there, the show might have been able to work. Gene Coon wrote better dialogue than Roddenberry. The aliens weren't really characters; they were just types. Sineski felt that the rushed schedule was the most damaging factor. He said, quote, "There wasn't the time to work with the performances more. You get a take where all the lines make sense and you just have to go with it. I never really had to say much to Shatner, to any of them. They knew their characters better than I did, and they were always so right on. The main thing for the director was just to stage it and photograph it and get it in before time ran out." But at that time, in that episode anyway, Shatner struck me as being like Robert Culp, who I just worked with on I Spy. Both were talented guys, but their approach to acting was not always as sincere as it could have been. They were more into being stars than being actors. Not all the acting was off the mark. Regarding Nimoy, Sineski said, quote, "What I appreciated so much in Leonard's performance of this totally evil man was the way he charmingly played against the evil. That is something in which I strongly believe. Charming evil is so much more effective." Regardless of the rush, a script that needed a little more work, and one particularly heavy-handed performance, Sineski remained impressed by the themes presented on Star Trek. He said, quote, "By the latter 1960s, television, particularly, a voice that delivered any sort of message had pretty much been muted. Action had replaced the more thoughtful dramas of TV's golden age. That was why Star Trek was so unique. It could comment on current issues, using them as adventures of the future. But Star Trek many times went a step further, becoming prescient and presenting our dreams for the future. Kirk's speech in this episode about space is a good example. It was written 2 years before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon." And Sineski remained a fan of Star Trek cinematographer, adding, quote, "In spite of Paramount Studios cutting half a day from the shooting schedule, Jerry Finnerman's photography remained exemplary. His lighting has always continued to not only light the bodies, but illuminate the inner drama." Despite the apparently impossible goal, Sineski finished his assignment in what equated to a 5.5-day schedule of filming. The results, for the most part, are good, even quite good, but there are moments and performances which certainly could have been done over if time had permitted. Okay, so this aired on February 9th, 1968. And as usual, Gomer Pyle won the night. Even more than usual. Usually Gomer Pyle would have around a 40% share of the audience. On this night, it had 45%. And I think that was in part because on this night, actually, ABC was showing the Winter Olympics. So both Gomer Pyle and Star Trek's ratings are up just like a couple of points. Star Trek would usually be around 22, 23, 24, but it was up at 28 for the first half hour. And then in the second half hour, it actually rose to 30.3%, which was just slightly above the CBS Friday Night Movie, which was 31%. So for the second half hour, Star Trek actually won the time slot, which was rare. That didn't happen often. I think this is only the second time it had actually won one of the half-hour time slots. This season. I don't remember about first season. I'd have to go back and look. Okay, Roddenberry was so pleased by his own work with the script for Return to Tomorrow that he chose it to represent Star Trek for consideration in that year's Writers Guild Awards. So he used this episode, not Amok Time, not Journey to Babel. What else was there? Not a Piece of the Action or Patterns of Force. No, this one. The Guild, wanting to acknowledge the excellent writing being done at Star Trek, as it had the previous year with City on the Edge of Forever, gave the script a nomination in the category of Best Written Dramatic Episode, even though it was clearly not the best of Star Trek's episodes in Season 2. But Roddenberry's attempt to pay tribute to himself backfired, with the decision coming from the arbitration board giving full credit for the script to Dugan. The prestigious nomination went to an unknown writer named John Kingsbridge, aka Dugan. Regardless, Return to Tomorrow did not win. The battle over credit and the ensuing bad blood would continue. The Writers Guild decision that John Dugan, using the pseudonym of John Kingsbridge, received sole writing credit was honored only on the episode itself. In 1973, for a book called Star Trek IX, and of course, this was a series of books that basically adapted Star Trek episodes into stories, into prose stories. So for the ninth book in that series, this episode was adapted. And in that book, Dugan was given co-writer credit with Roddenberry, and Dugan's actual name was used, not the pseudonym. Dugan wasn't happy about that, so he wrote to the Writers Guild and complained. An investigation was conducted. The findings, James Blish, who lived in England, was using the scripts as a guide for his novelizations, and the final draft for Return to Tomorrow is typed in November 1967 prior to the Writing Guild's action, listed Roddenberry as having written the teleplay and Dugan as having provided the story. 19 years later, Return to Tomorrow was released to home video by Paramount Pictures, and again there was a discrepancy over the credits. Dugan complained, quote, "I was livid. I mean, to be an original Star Trek writer is quite a thing. Then to have your credit stolen by the god of Star Trek is a cheap shot. I put the tape in and saw the credit is fine on the show itself, but what pissed me off was that it's wrong on the jacket. I don't even know if I've gotten my royalties correct or if I've been splitting them with Roddenberry all these years." I would wager on splitting them with Roddenberry. Roddenberry was never shy about sharing other people's royalties. Dugan was preparing a lawsuit against Paramount Pictures and Gene Roddenberry in 1992 when he was diagnosed with cancer. His last word on the subject was, "In light of the fact that I have a limited period of time left, I agree to settle, so Paramount wrote me a big fat check." Diana Muldaur talked with Starlog in 1989, saying the qualities that I admired in Gene Roddenberry were his creativity. Let me bring a picture of her up. There's a good one. In Hollywood, they buy you because you're creative, and then they try to drain it all out of you to make you commercial, and he never gave in. John T. Dugan said, quote, "You have no control as a writer. You do your job, and then you step back and you hope for the best. All in all, I was pleased, and I had no objections to the actors' performances." Ralph Sineski disagreed about the performances. He said, quote, "It's funny, but when we get into Obsession, Bread and Circuses, and Return to Tomorrow, which were all shot on that crazy fast schedule, it's like I shot them on fast forward, and my primary memory of them is just trying to get them done. The pressure was there to try and give the actor the chance to give a performance, and that wasn't always easy." All right, and that will do it for Return to Tomorrow. So the next episode that I'll be looking at next week, and no, that will not be next year. That'll still be this year. Just barely. It'll be New Year's Eve next Tuesday. But the next episode will be Patterns of Force, which we all know as the Yahtzee Planet episode. Between now and then. So I know I've promised this repeatedly the last couple of weeks. So my video on the top 5 Marvel villains for The Flash will be done either tomorrow or it'll be out Christmas, one or the other. It'll be out in a couple of days before the end of the week. I'll promise that much. I will probably live stream Sunday as usual, and then again be back next week for that. I guess that will do it for now. Please do like this stream, and please do sub to the channel if you haven't already, and check out some of my other videos while you're here. And as mentioned earlier, thanks to everyone who will listen to this stream on a rewatch and everyone who listened during the stream. And Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope you all have a Happy New Year as well. And Rogues gives a thumb up. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here. And I will see you all next week. Have a good night.